Do you hear me well, Will?
Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Joana Domingues, who is sitting in Portugal today. Joana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Will. Very happy to be here with you.
So, Joana, I know you've been at McKinsey as an external coach for 22 years, coaching consultants there, and you also have your own practice as an executive coach. What I was hoping to cover today was really focusing on just one part of your practice, which is building alignment around top teams with the focus on how to run a really effective top team offsite session. But before we get into that, just give us an overview of your coaching practice.
So I started coaching about 15 years ago when I actually left McKinsey. I started exploring it while I was still there. I started as a generalist consultant, and then I was getting some frustration around what some of the projects that didn't move. And I started getting very curious about what really got people to believe what they were doing and to get really engaged. And that got me to explore other sides of consulting that were more connected to how you bring people together and not just about having very smart content. So I've been, that's when I discovered coaching and when I trained as an executive coach. And I've been coaching individuals now more and more C-level and C-level teams around their biggest challenges.
What are some of the things that you learned in the coaching training and in your development as a coach that consultants, smart consultants, don't know? So what are some of the kind of the tools of the trade of an executive coach that may be hidden knowledge from management consultants?
What a great question, Will. So I think the first one that I realized was the power of questions in getting people to really engage. So I as a McKinsey consultant, you give a lot of advice, so there's a lot of telling, and of course you use questions to diagnose, but it's really to give the client the answer. And one of the things about coaching is that you trust the client will find an answer. So what you're really helping him do is really identify what are the inner strength and the resources they already have and what's really getting in the way for them to get moving, to get to what's important to them. And that's best done with more with questions. Then of course we use also, feedback and see showing what we see, but there's a lot of having questions, open questions that get them reflecting, that create a deeper engagement that only giving advice. That's a big one. The second one was on the emotional realm. So I realized I spent a lot of my McKinsey life and before using the logic and my mathematical strength and analytical strength, and that's great for solving problems. But we often leave out what people are going through emotionally when they have really complex problems to solve, or when they get stuck on things that from outside looked really simple. And so exploring what's really going on for people internally and how emotions play a role in that and being comfortable in with them uh, has been a big learning about what's also needed for things to move and be engaging. Maybe those two I would highlight.
I love questions. What are 5 or 10 of your favorite open-ended coaching questions? Some of your go-to questions?
So one that's immediate is what would success look like, right? So we often start with the problem, and people are looking for tools, but getting them out of the mode of solving to first defining what success is. And sometimes you realize we're putting a lot of effort on solving something that maybe is not the biggest thing if you consider what really success is. So what would success look like? Um, then with the challenges, right? So when people bring an obstacle, so we don't have the time or we don't have the money, or is asking you, so what if you would have all the time in the world? What would that change? And often answers come with that we have excluded, right? Because we are assuming the obstacle is and unsurmountable. And if when you stop just to assume the obstacle isn't there, more options come. So what success would look like? What if you didn't have that obstacle that you're considering? What's really important for you about that? Is that taps into the deeper motivations of why are we really doing this? Why is it worthwhile? And that brings more energy into what we're doing. What have you not tried yet that maybe would take you there and you haven't been bold enough to go there? And one I really like is, what would you do if you could only do what you feel like? If if you totally owned all the variables and you could decide everything and just do what you like, what would you do?
Yeah. One question my coach asked me at each session, and I got an executive coach about a year ago, is what are you avoiding right now?
Always
a painful question, because there's always something, right, that you're avoiding. And then it's like, okay, well then why aren't you doing that? Why are you avoiding it? Let's talk about top teams. And I know that you work on all sorts of problems or all sorts of issues, but let's talk a particular situation around CEO comes to you and says, hey, my top team doesn't feel aligned, so you're going to work on helping to generate alignment around the top team. And one of the things that you've decided to do is to have some kind of offsite session. I'm very much interested in best practices around how to prepare for a session like that, to conduct the session. What do you actually do there? What are the exercises? What's it look like? And then how do you follow up on that? So that's what I hope we could spend a lot of the rest of our time today talking about. So maybe tee up a situation for us. It could be a sanitized example of a client you've worked with, or a hypothetical example, and walk us through maybe how you might start preparing for some kind of offsite strategy, offsite or top team alignment offsite.
Sure. So I'm thinking of this CEO who called us a few months ago, and they've had a huge restructuring of the company, and he made some changes to the top team, and now they have this really ambitious plan ahead. But he's noticing tension among some of the new members that he brought to the management board and some of those that have been there for a very long time. And he starts to fear that those tensions are really getting in the way, and notice that they're actually getting in the way of conversations to be productive, for them to collaborate on the day-to-day. And that's a big concern, because those two areas are really important, that they get along and do things together. And so we start from that request, and we interviewed the CEO more deeply on what he sees, what success would look like, all the things we've been exploring, and then we interview the other members of the team. So what are they experiencing? So we don't have a one-sided perspective of the CEO, but actually the diverse perspectives of the team. What is working well? What do they miss? How is that affecting their own role and the performance of the organization? So why is this all relevant anyhow? And once we get some alignment or some common ground there, we set up a joint meeting to actually play back what we heard about why this is important for them to work on their collaboration. And we believe that truly the success of the top team is not just defined by what they define as success, but really what their main stakeholders perceive and expect, how much their expectations are fulfilled. So then we ask them to choose who are their main stakeholders as a collective, and we ask their stakeholders, so what are really the main value that this top team should create together, that they cannot create on their own as individual board members. Where are they already delivering on those expectations, and where are they short of the expectations of each stakeholder group? And then we bring that back to the team, and that's the first phase, is truly holding the mirror for them, is how their stakeholders are perceiving them, what they expect, and where they see strength and opportunities for development. And that includes themselves, right? How they themselves perceive themselves. So that's the preparation, right? And from there, we define what feels like the most important topics to address with them in the first offsite, which should be really to digest this feedback, to get them to absorb it, have all the questions answered, realize what they don't understand fully yet, and that they want to go and clarify with their own stakeholders, and where they really want to work, because they receive a lot of feedback, but they need to choose what's important for them to work on. So that would be a first offsite, and then from there we decide together a few next steps that they can already start moving on to move on the goals they decided for themselves between that offsite and the coming offsite. So this is normally a process that is about 1 year with the top team. And then for the next offsite, we go again, listening to each of them, asking what progress has been made so far, how close are they moving into the goals they stated, and what's now most important to deal with, and face, not avoid, as you were saying, Will. So each offsite includes hearing each member and really creating an agenda that integrates different perspectives and needs.
All right. So let's go a bit finer dive into just the preparation phase. So, like, do you have kind of a template of questions that you would be asking each executive prior to that event, or the board members potentially that they report to, or their direct reports who report into them? Is there like a standard template, or what would your preparation phase include?
Yes, there is. So we follow an approach we call systemic team coaching. So we did not invent it. It was developed around the work of Peter Hawkins. And that approach assumes that there's 5 areas where a top team, or any team in any case, needs to excel, to be excellent over time. And that's how clearly they negotiate expectations for their own performance with their key stakeholders. So engaging and negotiating what we call their commission. The second one is, how do they translate that internally into their own focus and tasks that they have together as a team, and processes to manage those tasks. So that's what we call alignment of the team. And then we have the relationships, both how they relate with each other. Are these relationships uplifting? Do they create development for the team members? And does the way they relate in meetings and outside of meetings really contribute to what they need to accomplish? And where not? What are some of the patterns of relationship that are getting in the way? Then how they relate to their stakeholders, that's the fourth discipline. So how are they engaging regularly with their stakeholders to manage changing expectations, delivery, lack of delivery, what's possible, what's not. So how they keep managing and nurturing those relationships with their key stakeholders. And the fifth one is what are the processes they have, if any, to reflect on how they do what they do and how they relate with each other and stakeholders to keep learning. So what are the processes for continuous learning and development that they have, what we call the core learning. So the questions are more broadly what I said before, what is the expectation of this group of things that the value they should create that they can't do by them individually, where are they delivering and where not, and then around these 5 areas some more specific questions that help you understand how they're doing on each of those what we call disciplines of managing their stakeholders and managing themselves and keeping learning as they go.
So talk to me about what you often find on these diagnostics across these 5 areas. So are there different maybe categories of where a top team would land? So, some typical patterns, for example, like, is it that they can be good on 4 of these, but really lacking on 1? Or is it companies that just, they're kind of low across the board? Or are there, some companies would be good on number 1, but bad on number 2, or some companies are good on 2, but bad on 3 and 4, or some companies just lack 5 altogether? Like, tell me a little bit about what you might find on the deliverable, and you're presenting, go back to the board. Hey, here's our findings. What are some things that you might be saying?
So there are different patterns. I'd say there are some that are common and some that are more diverse. I find what's most common is that these top teams don't really have a structured process to understand their stakeholders' expectations in a regular and structured way. So that seems very uncommon that it exists. So that's transversal, and when they see the value that comes out from doing that in a structured way, the immediate next question is, how are we going to keep doing this in a way that is useful and practical as we go over time? Because there's so much that we learn just from having a structured feedback process from our key stakeholders. Then I've also often then there's a variety of things that are more different among teams. So I've seen teams that are really they really have great relationships, and they really seem to get along. And the issue there is that they're not talking about the difficult things. Is that there's so much emphasis on harmony that the big elephants are not coming to be addressed. And so there's a big emphasis on the quality of the relationship, but there's really an underlying current of things that we don't talk about, and therefore limit how bold we can be and how we address the problems that are really tough for us. There's the opposite pattern of teams that are so in your face with a challenge that they get stuck in wars. There you just can see very unproductive conversations that really are not going anywhere. So it's not that the elephants are not in the room, is that they are, but it's just in a way that it feels very unproductive and get stuck. What I also find is many of these teams, and that's a common one again, together with the feedback, have limited the processes to really stop and learn. So often they did do offsites, but they invite speakers and do things that are fun, and it's all great, but they don't really often stop to think about themselves as a team. Say what is really working and what is not, and what do we need to learn to do better together that will take us to the next level. So I guess I was thinking out loud as I heard you. There's 2 common ones of missing structured feedback and structured reflection. It's like most of these teams seem to be on a high pressure to deliver, and so they do less of this stepping back than would be useful for them. And then in terms of relationship, there's really different patterns of harmony seekers and conflict seekers, but in a way that feels sometimes not really productive. So the balance between those two is really the magic. Yeah, how do you nurture relationships while bringing up the things that are hard, but valuing the differences between the different people in the team, their needs, their perspectives, because that's where the big value really comes from.
Fantastic. Okay, that's very helpful. So let's take the example of a top team that does not have this structured reflection process in place to capture expectations of stakeholders. And let's say that you have agreed with the top team that, okay, we're going to do an offsite retreat to work on this issue. Talk to me a bit about like the planning and the agenda for that offsite. And you could start even with, what physical kind of environment do you think would be, would you be looking for that offsite? Is it just like, what have you found works best? Just a hotel room somewhere, or getting out physically in nature, or like what sort of environment would work well? And what would your agenda be like? Are we doing this on a Saturday? Is it during the week? Just really kind of walk me through, make me feel like I'm physically there. Give me a sense of what your agenda is going to be and how you're going to run it.
Great. So the physical place we look for is normally a place that instills reflection and that is relaxed. So we surely recommend not being in your normal office, because you keep getting the same impulses, right? Being on a rush and dealing with every day. So a place that instills more. So that's normally with close by nature of some kind, and where we can have a lot of natural light and easily spend time outside and inside effortlessly, with a lot of flexibility, so that in the middle of the day we decide it would be good to go on a walk around a big question that just arrived, and it's easy to do that. So we like to combine not being sitting all the time in the same room, but actually creating a mix of times where you can be sitting, where you can be laughing, where you can be quietly reflecting, where you can be with a pair or in the big group. So we have a combination of different styles of reflection and conversation to get more variety of inputs. So that's what we normally look for on a place. The way we would prepare for a conversation around having this, what the topic you asked about, how we create structure, the inputs from our stakeholders. We would start again with the individual interview. So we would get deeper in the interviews and say, which stakeholders are you currently having a structured feedback from, or not structured, but some kind of, what's working well, what's not, what are really the difficult conversations that the team is not having around this topic, and that are really key for you to move on. And with that, we get a variety. We paint a picture. Right? We paint a picture of where there are commonalities. So maybe some of the team, a big part of the team sees strengths in one place and development opportunities in a different place, and what's different, where they seem to have different views of what is important to solve, and we build that list, and then we create an agenda with that, and that could start with playing back what we heard of common themes and big questions to address, where there seems to be conflicting views, and then we would have pieces of the day that we choose with them, to decide where we go first. So it's quite a flexible agenda, in the sense that there's these big topics that are occurring, and we have a few ways of managing those conversations, often starting with an individual reflection, or with the paired conversation with the person who has the most different view from yours, and gradually bring it to the group in a more digestive way. sometimes we bring them down back in smaller groups to propose the next steps for the team. So we're not doing that all together, which is quite time consuming and often not so productive to start from scratch with the whole group. So, but it comes back to listening to each other, listening to different perspectives, understanding them, and then together deciding how we move on. That's the big scheme of we often also help the team ask more questions to each other, because often we have very strong views. So we often have a process that is very structured in terms of, you listen to a proposal, there's no response to that. You can only do clarifying questions for a while to really understand why the proposal was the way it was. And then there's maybe some challenge to what you've heard or things you want to add to make the proposal stronger. And then we move on. So there's structure in how, depending on what we observe of the patterns of the team, we often propose a structure for the conversation itself that's gonna address what feels less constructive about the way they normally talk to each other.
Yeah. So let's say
Did
that
I answer enough?
So let's say we have the offsite location. It's nice, kind of in nature. We have places for people to pair off individually or to get together in a group or to sit, silently and reflect. So we've got our location. Let's say we have from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. we've done it on a Saturday so that people aren't, so busy with work that day. People arrive. I imagine there's probably, at least based on things I've seen, there's probably people come into the room. There's probably some coffee or something for people to help themselves. And walk us through, like, what would the actual hour by hour agenda look like for a day? People arrive at 8:00, 8:30, you kick off. And do you have a icebreaker kind of exercise or something, or does the CEO talk, or do you talk? And then give us sort of almost an hour by hour, agenda for that day of what would the sessions look like?
So if it was to be one of these, first one of diagnostic, we would that we're playing back the diagnostic, we would start certainly with the CEO welcoming everyone and explaining why he thought it was important to do this work now that we're together again, and what's important for him or her. And then typically a check-in, so a place where everyone can have a voice, and that might include that might be like an half an hour just of hearing each other, where it's not really conversation, it's just really hearing each other where we are. And that might include, how I'm feeling as I arrive. So again, integrating emotions. What am I expecting? What do I fear? What would be success for me in this offsite? So they start having a bigger understanding about what's inside each other's minds and hearts, right? So we start from there. Then we would typically bring the agenda. So this is kind of things we heard from the interviews, still very high level. So this is and what you asked us to focus on. So here's the agenda that we're gonna have. So we share the big blocks of the agenda, and then we would normally have a warm up that is connected with the theme, right, that we're seeing. So let's say if there's a theme of listening to each other, we might have an exercise where you need to where there's a lot of laughter, but that they need to listen to each other in a way, or make each other very difficult to hear. so that we start addressing some of the things we're seeing, but in a way that is fun. And we start to bring more, just a more relaxed environment. We typically also do agreements. So this might be very uncomfortable, given, when we ask for feedback, there's always this the risk that some of the things we hear feel painful. So what do you need to really make the best of this, and from each other and from yourself, to really be present with what's coming and deal with potential frustrations and what might happen for you. So there's a set of agreements. We start typically with confidentiality, that whatever they are going to speak there stays with them until they decide something else. So they have this psychologically safe space to just to say what's on their mind without worrying that it's going to be brought back to some other team without being agreed to. So that we're going to be really present there, that we're going to be honest, that we're going to, if we feel uncomfortable, we're going to say it. So the agreements they need, and some of them we bring ourselves as a suggestion to really make that work. And engagement also is a big part of that. So they have a word to say on how we're going to work together. And then we start going through the themes of the diagnostic we covered, and that there we might have big posters on the walls. So we tend to avoid PowerPoint as much as we can in terms of projecting, having a projector, because we feel that just brings an energy of being a spectator. And so we would normally have posters on the walls and some other printed copies, so you can look more in detail if you like. And we would invite them to go in pairs and visit the big themes and comment with each other, what they're seeing, what's surprising, what's shaking them. And that could take an hour and a half, because there's normally a lot of material. Then maybe we go for lunch, and then when we come back, there's playing back what we felt, and again, not just what we think, but also how we are experiencing this feedback. And also, what are the big themes? What are the themes of strength that sound important, that we want to keep? What are topics that I'm hearing about our development that sound important to me? And we start creating some alignment on what is really, what do we perceive together, and that might be already in the big group, as the big 5 things we really need to do together as a team that no one else can do for us. And so there starts to be alignment on what's our common mission, really, if we hear ourselves and our stakeholders. And then often after that, there's so if we start a common mission, we'll have a conversation about what we're doing well, yes, already, and that we want to keep and not spoil. And that might be in small groups, and you come back with the big things and practices that you want to keep. And then what are the big priorities for making change? And again, you might have small groups that bring what they perceive of the priorities, and they present it to each other, and we have an alignment on what would be the priorities. And then next steps. So what we go back to the big plan of the program, right? So when's the next, going to have a few offsites where you can dig deeper in some of those priorities that you defined. What's the first one where you go feel it's important to focus? And you might have a voting and a discussion of the voting. Some of the immediate next steps they can take. And normally that's it. That would be already quite a full day.
That would be a full day. And then how would you work with the team following up from an event like this? What, do you...
So the difference between a one-time offsite and a team coaching process is that we have defined that this is the development part of the team, of course, starts with the feedback. That's already creating development, but that there's a follow-up to be done. And that's why we say, that's 3 or 4 offsites over the year, but there's also our monthly presence in one of their regular meetings where we can observe what's going on, play back what we see, and how it's connected with the diagnostic we saw, some of the things that are going on in those conversations, regular meetings, and then do a short follow-up. How are they doing on what they said they would do? What's moving? Is there one thing they need to change as to make things go faster or go better since the last time we saw each other? So there's these big deep dives that happen in over the year, but there's also this monthly timing where we have this dual role of observing what they're actually doing in their normal meetings, giving them feedback, helping them reflect, and following up on what they agreed.
And would that be how do you manage the issue if you're just coaching one person? Then you can be kind of that person's advisor and so forth. How do you manage the situation if you're coaching an entire team? Then one person on the team might say, hey, I don't really get along that well with person B because they do all this like annoying stuff, right? And then you're also coaching person B. Like, do you have to, do you keep that in confidence? So you have all these confidences to track, or, you don't want to go to person B, hey, person A really can't stand you because you're doing all these things. And I can't stand that person either. So how do you kind of keep the different confidences like from straying and not be perceived as, oh, you're just sort of the CEO's person, but get viewed as this independent, neutral, help person who's trying to really help the whole company. And how do you kind of navigate that whole challenge?
Great question. So one of the things we do to not just be the CEO person is really to have meetings with everyone of the team to prepare each offsite, so they can gradually, as they see that what they tell us is kept confident, and that we only bring patterns without telling anyone who said what, but then they, building on that, they can speak up, and that trust is built gradually, right? Because they see consistently that whatever they told us, we use to in a way that can come to the group that is not um yeah, exposing anything you don't want to be exposed, right? So respecting the speed at which each person wants to speak up. Then when we also do individual coaching, because we often do both at the same time, we coach the whole team and we coach their members. What we ask is, are there existing conflicts between some people in the team that you already know of? And we ask that to the CEO. That because those people should not have the same coach. So what we normally do is, I work in a team of coaches. Two of us are coaching the team as a whole, and then we distribute the members among us, but to try to avoid that people who have at least known conflict are not coached by the same person. Everything is still confidential. That's the agreement of coaching, and it's really important. But more than just being respecting that, there's this sense of looking like you're really not speaking to other people. So there's this space of knowing you can have your own coach, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same as that other person that you don't really like. Yeah. Now, we don't, that's one of the things we contract up front. We don't intermediate conflict. So very clear saying, whenever person A talks about person B, you can be sure we're not going to bring it to person B. What we're going to do is challenge person A to ask, have they brought that to person B? What do they need to bring it in a constructive way, and help them prepare to bring it to the team? And sometimes it's just with that other person. Sometimes it's a topic that is about the whole team, but they have not felt confident or comfortable in bringing up. And so we're helping that person understand what's getting in the way, what are the conditions to bring that in a way that feels safe. And if they don't, that they also take responsibility for that. Right? That they're not ready yet, and that they accept the consequences of not being able.
Tell me about a success that you've had as a coach that you're particularly proud of, that, you obviously keep it sanitized, but share something that you felt like, wow, I really had an impact on that company, on the individual. I really helped them out. And I knew that the change was partly due to my efforts, something that was really satisfying too. Tell us a story about that.
So one of that I was most proud of was this German CEO that came to Portugal to manage the country let's say, business of a multinational organization. And he was feeling really puzzled with the team. He was expecting them to really confront him and tell him what was in their mind. And what was happening is that they were quiet in meetings, and then they would come and question the decision after the meeting. And he was really puzzled with that and getting very frustrated. And so we came to help, and what happened over time is that we help them realize how they, even culturally, they had very different expectations about direct versus indirect communication, about what you say in public to your boss that is going to be like humiliating to your boss. And so in the culture like Portugal, you wouldn't say it, while in Germany you would expect to be straight, and you don't see any humiliation on that. So we started helping them by interviewing, again, all parties to understand how they perceive each other, the different expectations they have of each other, and to gradually be able to speak about them in a way that feels constructive, that it's not about an attack, but more about understanding how we're different, and how can we make that work. And so we saw gradually, as we were in these offsites with them, that gradually more and more hard topics came to the table, and that they could find solutions for problems that had been there for years. So in Portugal, they have this traditional assumption that it's really hard to fire people. And this German CEO really had a lot of complaints from the team about people who didn't perform. And he brought that challenge and say, so, how are you evaluating these people? Because if they get good evaluations all the time, then of course we can fire them, but you're still not happy with them. And there was this huge new project that emerged from that was together of really clarifying among them who was performing and who was not. How were they going to be more transparent with that? And in 2 or 3 months, they really managed to negotiate several people to leave the company that collectively they had been unhappy with for many, many years. And so and they were really happy with that. That allowed them to then hire people who hadn't that would deliver more of what they wanted. And that just the fact that they have different styles and expectations became really valuable for the organization. But also the German CEO also gained more sensitivity to some of the things he did that actually created fear in the team of speaking up in a context like Portugal. And so we saw both the conversations becoming more and more honest, and the problems coming more into the table, but also some of the important problems that they were dealing with being handled because they could speak about them more. So that was great. Then that CEO moved to another country, to Benelux, and we ended up working with him with his Benelux team. So that's Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. That was another culture pot that we came and helped him with. But really exciting to see that progress happen.
So in that situation, did the German CEO become more Portuguese and kind of learn to be more sensitive to nuance, or did the Portuguese team learn to just be direct and tell the CEO, here's how it is, and overcome their own culture, or did they kind of meet in the middle somewhere and become more sensitive and the team gets more comfortable? Yeah. Like, how did that play out? That
I think both. I think it's like as they understood each other better, right? So, and they trusted that when he was really direct, they could count on his directness, that he was not gonna ever do something he wouldn't tell them directly. They learned to trust him more for that, actually. And to know that they could speak directly to him, that he would not hold it against them, really. And that gave them the space to speak up in ways they hadn't done with their previous boss. But also, I think he realized that he was a very tall, man, he had been in the military, so he could be scary when he was being serious. And he also learned about, how what were some of the ways he spoke that created fear for people here. And so he also adapted more to that. So for me, the beauty is truly understanding each other. It's not becoming the other person, but understanding what the other person needs and stands for, and that creates more trust and a better space to just to use each other's strengths because they are different.
Yeah. You said you work in a team. Just, in the few minutes we have left, just tell us a little bit about that. Is this a kind of a firm, or is it more of a loose, set of teammates that you collaborate with, or that you collaborate with, but everyone's independent? Or tell us about the other folks that you work with.
Yes. So based in Portugal, it's four of us. Um, we don't really have a firm because when we met, we already had firms of our own. But we have a brand of that we created to all the projects we did together. And when we work with organizations, we do all the projects we do are together. But we do something separately. So I teach in the business school. Two of us also do that, but we do that independently, right? We don't do it together in the business school. I do some projects with McKinsey that's connected with my previous relationship with McKinsey abroad, and that's something that I do. Right? Some individual coaching we do with people that approaches we do separately. So we have this very strong core of projects we do together and things we decide to learn together, like a practice, what we call the voice dialogue. So something that we find really exciting about the way of coaching, that we all train together in it. So we have a common language and a common approach. We help each other. We on the continuous certification of coaching. So we listen to each other's recordings. We support each other. We give each other feedback, just really to strengthen each other. So we have this alliance that's both for corporate clients, but also to keep helping each other grow and develop. And that feels like a very warm and cozy home to go back to, but also gives us freedom to do some things on our own that we like.
I just love that so much, that idea of having this, group of collaborators that are helping each other out, supporting one another. It's just such a wonderful model. Joana, if folks wanted to find out more about your practice, what would you point them online? Where would you point them online, either to a website or URL, or if they want to get in touch with you to follow up?
So we have a website with that brand we have together. It's called Outside. So like seeing from outside, yeah. Outside.pt for Portugal. And there you can find our contacts and some examples of the work we do, and it's easy to reach out to us if you want to know more beyond that.
Fantastic. Well, Joana, thank you so much for joining today. This was a great learning experience for me. Really loved the idea. Got a lot of tips on how to think about running a offsite for these sorts of things, and really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to reflect on my own practice with your questions. So a lot of great coaching questions that you asked too.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.